call the meeting to order. We'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we'll do, because I know there's at least one person online, so we'll do a roll call.
Sure. So again, just to be able to hear each other online and in person, please say here. Wendy.
Here.
Kristen.
Here.
David G.
Here.
Annie.
Here.
Tyler.
Here.
Christine.
Here.
Leslie.
Here.
Patricia.
Yesterday.
Yeah, it's here.
Oh, we got you. Thanks.
Did you see
Rebecca.
Here.
Sean.
Here.
Brian had told me he would be absent at the boys basketball game. He's got a son that plays, so. David T.
T is here.
Tom. And I know our two student reps are not here tonight, so they are both absent.
All right, thank you. Next up is citizens' comments. I don't see any members of the public here. Is there anyone online to comment that wants to, please raise your hand and let Diane know. We're jumping into it rather a little quick tonight. Give it a minute. We good. All right, thank you. Moving right along, additions, adjustments to the agenda by the Board of Superintendent.
Yep, I do have one, and that's going to be to authorize Steve Vose to act as the NBRC authorized official on paperwork for a grant. I did put a memo on in front of you that we can talk to. So I'd like to make that one number 6 and then move 6, 7, and 8 down one.
Got it. All right, anyone else? All right, moving right along, budget workshop. We'll jump right into the fun.
So tonight I asked Mandy to do the presentation right from the table, and we do have some handouts that she will pass around as she's going through the presentation. And Diane, if you want to pull up the presentation also, I'll turn it over to Mandy. And
Because my son played for, first he played for a Florida State called Dorado Lewiston, and then he played for the Thunder. Yeah. Those were fun times. I mean, it's still fun, but now it's getting more angry. He got thrown out. It's, still fun.
So, this is for today's agenda, we're gonna look at factors that are impacting the ED 279, as we did get those, in since the last budget meeting. So we'll look at that. We'll look at, the revenue, enrollment, and property valuation as they pertain to the ED 279. And we will present a second draft of the budget for you. So I can actually hand out, I printed copies because I know it's hard to see that up there. So I actually printed some copies for you guys so that you can have the presentation in front of you so that you can see the information clearer. So the next one, yep.
There we go.
So on this one, I just want to highlight some of the things that affect revenue. Enrollment affects revenue. Pretty loud. Okay, can you hear me now? So factors that affect revenue, the first one on the list is enrollment. We have to submit enrollment counts on October 1st, and this affects ED 279 in a couple of ways. It's attending enrollment and subsidized enrollment, and I'll go over that a little deeper in a few minutes. One of the other things that affects it is staffing. And then they use these figures to help project our per pupil rate. And again, I will go over all of this as I go through the ED 279 with you. Weighted amounts, these are additional amounts that we get for limited English proficiency and economically disadvantaged students. The next one is targeted amounts. These are additional amounts that we get for assessment, technology resources, K2 students, 4-year-old students, economically disadvantaged, and multilingual learners. A couple other adjustments that we get are part of being with the RSC, and then superintendent's agreements. And then the last thing that I want to make a point to note is that property valuations affect how much we get for revenue. So the first slide that I have here are our enrollment counts. The first one that you'll see on there is the attending enrollment. And I also brought a copy of the ED 279, which I'll pass out, so you guys can be looking at that as I'm explaining how that's determined. I'll wait until you guys get a copy of it. And I apologize, this is small print. That's how it comes, there's a lot of information on it. So on page 1 of the ED 279, this is how they compute our EPS rates. So they use this data to determine a per pupil rate, and that rate is based on elementary and then secondary, and secondary is 9-12. So elementary is pre-K to 8. So when you're looking at this, the first section, it says attending count. So you'll see up on the presentation that our attending counts for October 1 of 2023 were 1189. And for October 1 of 2024, they're at 1155. So we've had a decrease of 34 students. So that's a 2.86% decrease in our enrollment. And what they do is they take a 2-year average. And so our 2-year average, even though our yearly average went down 34 students, our 2-year average went down 25.5 students. So that was a 2.18% decrease. They then use those figures in the next section. So when you're looking at section B of that page 1, that's staffing. And so you'll see that if you look at that first column where it says pre-K, K, EPS, FTE, they're saying that they will cover a 15-to-1 ratio. So what they do is they say if you have 117.5 average students in that category, they divide that by the 15, and that's where they say they'll cover 7.83 FTEs. Does that make sense? Anybody have a question on that? So then if you follow that across, they do that the same in each of these columns. So you'll see the 1 to 5 EPS, and that will correlate with the 1 to 5 average attending students in the above attending counts. Again, this one's at 17-to-1, so they'll divide that by 17 to come up with that 22.74 for teachers. 6 to 8, same thing, and 9 to 12. And then if you follow it over to EPS FTE total, that's all of those added together. So according to the EPS formula, at a minimum, they're saying that to run our district, we need at least 71.24 regular teachers. So Then the next column is actual FTE. So this is data that we report. When I said on the previous slide that staffing counts matter, this is where that is reported. So we have to report also in the fall how many staff we have in each of these categories. So you can see that they said they would cover 71.24, and we currently have 103.1 FTEs. They then take that and they divide the two to see what percentage they're going to cover. So the 71.24 is 69%, or the 103, it's 69% of that. So they're gonna cover 69% of whatever the dollar amount or the salary amount that's associated with those staffing. So when we enter the staffing, we also enter their experience and their degree levels. And there's a salary matrix that DOE puts out, and they'll look at that and they'll say, okay, of all these 103 teachers, where do they fall in this salary matrix? They then use that dollar amount for each of those teachers, and that's where they come up with in column, the SAU data in EPS matrix, where you see that column, that is where they took all of those salary amounts, combined them together. So for teachers, they say it would be 6,223,000. I think that's a 989, sorry.
Yes. 939, yeah.
939, sorry, having a hard time reading it, it is tiny. But that's how they determine that. So they use our data that we input based on our actual staffing, and they use their matrix to determine what dollar amount that matches up with. Then they take the 69% of that dollar amount, which is the adjusted EPS salary in that next column. And that's what they determine is our EPS level. Then it's split out between elementary and secondary based on what are the, which of these teachers are elementary and which are secondary. They do this, you can see, for guidance, librarians, health, ed techs, library ed techs, clerical, and school admin. So each of those, that's how that's determined. Then if you look at section C, this is how they compute benefits. They take a percentage, and this is a percentage that they've determined, not us. But they take a percentage and they multiply it by the salary amounts that were determined in B, and that's what they will give us towards any type of benefits. The next section is other support per pupil. This is based on student count, and they give us, again, they have specific dollar amounts. We don't determine that, they do. So you can see they give us $52 for every sub, and then they multiply it by our student count. So $52 in each, the pre-K to 8 and 9-12. But you'll see some of these amounts are not the same for both pre-K and 9-12. Some are higher for 9-12, such as supplies and equipment. So they give us 433 times the enrollment number for pre-K to 8, but they give us 599 in that category for 9-12. And so again, you can see each of the areas that they give us amounts for. So there's supplies and equipment, professional development, instructional leadership support, co and extracurricular, system admin and support, operations and maintenance. And so then they take from each of these categories, they take those amounts and they add them together. They have a small staff and substitute salary adjustment that they do, and they come up with a total, and that's at 6.4 million and the 3.2 million you see at the bottom. They then divide that by our pupil count, and that's where they determine what our EPS rates are per pupil for each of those levels. Does anybody have any questions on page 1? I know that's a lot. We don't usually go through the ED 279 in this detail, but we were asked to by the budget committee. The budget committee felt that, that the whole board should better understand how ED 279 works. So that's why we're going through it in this detail. On page 2, they then take that amount, so those per pupil amounts that they determine, which are $8,065 for elementary and 8,564 for 9/12. They then take those amounts and on page two, section 2, page 2, they determine what our actual operating cost allocations are. And so this, you'll see the pupil numbers are different. So it's not based on attending now. This page is based on subsidizable. So they use a subsidizable average, and that number is then multiplied by, in each of these categories that you see. So there's basic counts. We have weighted counts where we get more money for disadvantaged and the multilingual learners that I was speaking of, assessment, pre-K and targeted, and then they multiply it by the average pupil numbers by those per pupil rates that they had determined on the previous page. And that gives, for this section, a total of 10 million, we'll say 10.2 million. And then there's one more page that adds to the allocating cost, and that's other subsidizable costs. So those are gifted and talented costs, special ed costs, special ed high cost out of district, transportation cost, and approved bus allocations. They add those amounts together, and that's the 14.7 million that you see after section B in section 3. That amount from the previous year is up $742,205.32. So then on page 4, they take that $14 million amount, and this, they use the average subsidizable pupils specific to each town to determine, of that 14 million, how it's broken out by town. So you'll see all the way over to the right, just as an example, Manchester's is 4.6 million. That is the total amount that they say EPS, should be. However, that is then split between state and local. So then your next line shows based on your 3-year property evaluation. And I don't know if you can switch to the next slide, Diane. I believe the next slide talks about property valuation. So this is the 3-year average property valuation. For last year's budget, it runs from 2021 to 2023, and this year's runs from 2022 to 2024. So you can see what the increases are by town for your property valuation. The overall district-wide was an increased property valuation of 14.51%. And I do want to note that even though property valuations have gone up, they also reduced the mill rate. So it's not necessarily, that percent increase as far as the budget goes, but that was the valuation increase. So the mill rate last year was 6.62. I don't know how many people recall that, but last year it was 6.62. This year they reduced it to 6.1. So then they use those amounts that you see up there, the average amounts, and they multiply it by that 6.1 that you see in section B, and that's how they determine what each town's required local amount is. So then if you go down to C, they take the original amount that was up at the top, the 4.6 million for Manchester, for example, and they subtract the 2.65 that is the local required, and that's how they get the state amount. So you'll see over to the right of that last section, C, the state is going to pay on Manchester's behalf 1.9. So then on the last page, in section 5, this is where we would receive any adjustments that we receive. So on this page, you'll see that you see all 3 amounts. So you'll see the original 14.7 that they determined was our our costing allocation. Then you'll see the local contribution, the full amount, not broken down by town here, but the full amount, the 8.6. And then you see the state contribution of 6.1. And then the next section, the gray and white section, are any adjustments that we get. And one of them is the one we talked about for being part of the RSC. So we get a $42,000, just over a $42,000 adjustment for being part of the RSC. So the full amount that the state will contribute is the 6.144, 120.15. And also I want to point out, when you see under section C, under that green line, it shows you what your local share is based on EPS and what the state share is. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the 55%. A lot of people think that the 55% means the state is going to cover 55% of our budget. That's not how it works. They actually, the way it works is they determine the entire state's cost allocation for education, and they fund 55% of every district's education. Then how that shakes out to each school is very different based on a lot of factors: enrollment, disadvantaged students, all of that stuff that kind of occurs on page 1. So our portion is actually this year is 41.33%. And the state is, or the local's covering 58.67 and the state's covering 41.33. I will say I went back and looked, because I obviously haven't been in this position for very long. So I went back, I think like 10 years to look and see how this has changed over the years. And I will tell you that at one point it was down around 29, 30%. So they definitely have increased the portion of our budget that they are covering since the state started at least meeting 55% of all of education's. And then the last page is just how they disperse it. So you can see each month around the 15th of the month, we get a subsidy payment based on their allocations. Does anybody have any questions on the ED 279? Again, I know that's a lot of information to absorb, but the budget committee really felt it was important that the entire board understand a little bit better how the ED 279 works. If not, the next slide. So this is just kind of a recap of a little bit about the ED 279. So you'll see that first number is the state subsidy. So that is the primary amount that we will get from the state, the 6.1 million. The next one is that RSC adjustment of 42,000. And then the required local share, again, that's from the ED 279 of the 8.6 million. And then based on where we stand with our current budget, we're looking at an additional local share of 7.4 million. Our carry forward, as we presented at the last budget meeting, is 700,000. We have an additional carry forward. Again, we talked about this at the last meeting, of 92,000, and that's for that superintendent agreement adjustments. And then we have additional revenues that we receive for various things, such as tuition, reimbursable transportation, gates and receipts, ticket sales, things of that nature. And the next slide just goes over again our carry forward. That was at 700,000. I know this is a little hard to read, it's small, but that was the 700,000 plus the additional 92,656 for the superintendent's agreements. And we just wanted to, again, show you that we do use part of our carry forward to offset taxpayers' dollars in the next budget. The next one is, again, we went over this at the last meeting, but just wanted to share it again. This is our unassigned fund balance. And again, these are amounts that we use to offset taxpayer dollars in our current budget. We also have allocated a portion for the next budget. And then the two amounts that we are using to offset for the special ed reserve account and the capital reserve accounts. And these are just, the next two slides are just, again, showing you the information on the capital reserve account. We anticipate putting the $450,000 in that and using it to fix a couple of roofs, one at MES and one at RES. And then the special ed reserve account, we don't anticipate having to use that, but feel it's important to start putting some money into a reserve account to be prepared in, you know, the off chance that we get a high cost out of district that we didn't budget for. We don't want to be have a budget shortfall because of that. So we feel it's important to put money in that account because by law we have to take care of these needs for these students. So we don't want to be not having the funds to do that. And then the next one starts with the warrant articles. I can pass out the second draft of the budget. So
First
we
draft,
can
right?
take a look at that one. Second draft.
It'll be a second draft.
We did the first draft last week, or January 22nd.
Oh, sorry. My
Don't
mistake.
throw me off.
Yeah, sorry.
This is the revenue, we didn't know the
Yeah.
revenues.
So this first screen just lists the different articles, and you can go ahead to the next one, Diane, and we can go through each of the articles. So currently where we stand with Article 2, we're at just over 9.7 million with a 1.69% increase in regular instruction. On the next one, in special education, we are up just over 3.6 million, and that is a 12.71% increase. Career and tech is the next article, and we have zero cost for that, so zero increase as well, as we send our kids to CATSE. The next one is other instruction. This one, we currently sit at roughly just under 650,000, and that is a 14.05% increase. And as a reminder, that's where summer school sits. Student and staff support, this one is just over 2.4, and that's a 7.49% increase. Article 7 is system admin, and that one's a little over, right around 835,000, and that is under a 1% increase. It's at 0.72. School administration. This one is at a little over 1.5 million, and we're at 4.48% increase. And transportation, we're at a little over 1.3 million, and we're actually down on this article. We're down 27,000 of 2.03% on that one. Facilities and maintenance is Article 10, and we are at 3.74 million, and we are at 5.3% increase. Article 11 is another one that we have zero, so we have a 0% increase. And our last article is Article 12, and that one we are at 114,337.20, and we're up 0.01% increase. On the next one, that just summarizes all the articles I just went through, and it shows you that overall, if you recall last budget, we were at 6.73, and we are now at 4.59% increase. So the next sheet I will send send around. She sent these. So the next two sheets I've sent around are actually based on the last draft, so not this second draft, it's based on the first draft. And the reason we did this is because we wanted you to see the difference between what the local dollar calculation was at first draft, because we didn't have the ED 279 information at that time. But we still wanted you to see what that information looked like so that you can see the difference in the percentage from where we were to where we are now. So these first drafts are based on the budget that was presented on 1/22. So you'll see the total at that point was on, if you're looking at the revenue areas sheet, and that's this sheet here, the one that is vertical, not horizontal. So you'll see that that one is all the revenue areas that we discussed. So you have your EPS formula, your state share, your ESC adjustment, the national teacher funding portion, the tuition, transportation revenue, gates and receipts, miscellaneous, that additional balance forward that we get for superintendent's agreements of 92,656, the balance forward of 700,000, the 8.6 million that is the required local from the ED 279, bless you. And the additional local at that point was 7.9 million, and our total budget was at 24,497,524. If you then look at your local dollar calculation, usually the figure that everybody really is sets their eyes on is down at the bottom, towards the bottom of the page, where it says 25-26 total local contribution, and it says 16.6 million. Just under that, you'll see 8.25%. That is the percent increase that the first budget would have on the district-wide local. So you can see it breaks down by town. So Manchester's would be 8.73, Mount Vernon is 7.74, Reedfield is 8.12, and Wayne is 8.25. So that's where we would sit with the first draft budget. Again, we just wanted you to have these figures so you can see where we were to where we are now. So now I will hand out the current information. And all of these handouts will be available on the website. So on the next slide, you will see current local dollar calculation. So again, pretty much when you're looking at this sheet, the revenue area sheet that is vertical, you'll see that pretty much everything's the same. The only thing that's different is that additional local dollars down near the bottom. We went from 7.9 million to 7.4 million. And so our new total budget is 24,005,516. And then when you look at the other sheet for the local dollar calculation and you go down towards the bottom of that, you'll see that our percentage increase went from 8.25% district-wide to 5.04% district-wide. So that's where we sit right now. That translates to Manchester as a 5.48% increase. Mount Vernon is a 4.67% increase. Reedfield is a 4.65%, and Wayne is at 5.35%. And I'm happy to explain anything else on these forms if anybody has any question. I know there's a lot of information on it. At the top, it basically just gives you your the property valuation information, which we went over on another slide. It just lays that out for you so you can see that that overall was 14.51% increase, and it gives you each of the towns' increased percentage. The next section is just the required local and the mill rate, and that's from the ED 279. And then we give you last year's information so you have that to compare it to. And then the next section is the new additional local amount and how that breaks out to each town. And then the adult ed amount and how that breaks out to each town. And then at the bottom, you can see it gives you what our current tuition rate is and also what the local contribution per student per town is based on this budget. And I think the last slide is just our next upcoming dates. So again, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to. I know it's a lot.
So from the first draft to the second draft, we reduced almost $500,000 based on the work, the budget, or based on the recommendation of the budget committee. And any budget committee person that was at the meetings, please feel free to jump in. We can reduce almost $500,000 just based on attrition, and that's retirements or positions that are unfilled at this time with what I've got in hand at this time. Does that make sense? Okay, so at this time, we can cut almost $500,000 through the attrition positions that I have in hand.
So that's where that
Yes.
$492,008
Yes.
comes from.
Yes. And this is a lot of information to process, so please.
And that was purely through
Attrition, yes.
Nothing else.
Yes, nothing
Okay.
else. Yeah, that's nothing else. That's just positions that we would not fill going forward.
And that's what we asked you
Yes.
to look at for us as a committee. And to me, the challenge that you're taking on is how to, while using that attrition to help us cut the budget without cutting people, how to cover the work that's involved. And I know you're working hard with your team on doing
Yes.
that.
Yes. Oh, John.
Oh, yep. Christine, go ahead.
So this was such a great presentation. I thank you for all the info. So the positions that the attrition amounting to 492,000 or around 500,000, those are positions that would not be refilled. Is that right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
what are those positions?
So remember, we've been doing those positions through resignations and or retirements that I brought before the board. So these are only things that the board has already approved as far as the open positions go. And again, I can, if you want me to, I can list those off for you. But the thing I want to say, rather than listing them off, is to remind people that we're in kind of that season where we're probably going to get more. And what I'd like to do is take all of those positions as they come in and kind of lay them on the table and say, which ones can we reshuffle, figure out, do whatever we need to do. But here are some that we may actually have to fill as long as I don't cross that $500,000 line. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. It makes perfect sense. So what I want to know is that before we vote on a budget, we will be able to look at all those
Yes.
positions
Yes,
and know exactly where
absolutely,
we're cutting
yes,
and what the impact
yes.
would be. Okay,
Absolutely, yes. We will bring those forward.
thank you.
I just feel like it's a little early to say this one's in and this one's out, so. And again, we'll use I kind of informed the A-team of this on Monday where we were going. So I will want their input on that as we kind of make final decisions going forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions? Any?
Just
Yes,
a
go
general
ahead.
question, so if this is the second draft, what would a third draft potentially look like? Would it look very similar? Are we going to keep going, or to try to hopefully not, but I guess what I'm wondering is the third draft gonna look very similar to the second draft?
So the only, as of right now, the only other changes that I would anticipate would be to health and dental. We don't generally get those rates until sometime in March, unfortunately. We don't even know what their max is. So as of right now, I've budgeted 10% in hopes that that will cover it. Last year, we were at 11.4, so I want to be clear on that. However, we do get a mod rate from them, and our mod rate last year was not good. And this year is much better. We're in a much better position. So I don't anticipate it going over the 10%. I actually am hoping we'll be under. So in March, when we get those figures, I may be able to further reduce the budget based on that. Dental won't, even if it is below the 7% I budgeted, doesn't make as big of an impact as health. But the health insurance can make a significant impact if I can reduce that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yep, go ahead.
So I was wondering if we could talk about just the two biggest increases, the Article 5 and 3. One of them was summer school.
Yep.
Okay. Was there anything else? I mean, that's pretty big, the 14.
Right, so you're looking at
Well, I mean, it's
percentage,
small
but the
numbers,
dollar
right, the
amount's
numbers
low,
are
right?
small.
So it's an article that's small to begin with, so any increase in that article can really make it look like a much bigger increase than it is. Summer school alone is over 60,000 of that 79,000. So the rest is probably primarily salary and benefits. But that's mostly summer school. Special education, a good chunk of that was because we need to budget for 2 additional ed techs for CDS students that we are getting in the upcoming year. And we also
The funds.
budgeted additional for interpreter services.
Okay.
So
And
that
there was
would-
an extra, wasn't there a fund that no, special education?
We are looking to start a special education reserve fund, but that would not, that wouldn't be something that we would be able to cover like an ed tech, like a regular ed tech. That would be more for something that is unexpected, so a high cost out of district placement that we didn't anticipate. We do budget for a certain number of high cost out of district that we know we have. We would be using that more for if we had a placement or a student move in that has high needs that we didn't anticipate.
Okay. And then going back to this form, I don't know if you know the answer to this, as is kind of curiosity. But on the, let's see, section 3, there, in all of the other columns, they give numbers of students, you know, like allocations, but there's no, like, just how they figured that out with,
Sorry.
On the 279.
So you're talking about the gifted and talented student
yeah, and the
numbers, right,
special
Kristen?
education,
yes.
there's
So
no.
those calculations are actually based off of our actuals. And then the DOE determines what percentage of our actuals that we get. So we have to report, I report quarterly our actual finances, and then they take at the end of our previous year and look at that. And then we get a percentage based on what our actuals were.
Okay.
Yep, so it's not based on student counts necessarily, it's based on our actual expenditures in those areas.
Okay.
Hi. Hi.
Patricia, you have a question?
Yes, I do. I've been reading a lot about that the Department of Education might just be cut up or redistributed. And I'm wondering if there's a contingency plan for what federal monies we might get.
So that's a really good question, Patricia, that nobody really has an answer to right now.
Okay.
We are pretty much at the wait and see what happens stage. And once we know, then we'll kind of move forward, but it's a big, it's just kind of a big unknown. at this
Unknown.
point.
Okay. Thank you.
Any more questions, comments?
I'll just say,
Go ahead.
all of our emails are open on the budget committee, so if you've got suggestions at this point, them our way, so that way they will be meeting next week, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, our next committee meeting, I believe, is on February 26th.
26th, yeah.
Any more comments? I think, this is the time, to let folks know, if folks, don't have to go around right now, but as Tyler said, if folks are comfortable where this is headed, like the direction it's going, I like the direction it's going. I will say that a lot, I'm not gonna ask everybody, but I feel like in past budgets, things went to the end, and I kind of like how this is going, where we know earlier. So I think we need to do our part, I'm speaking for myself included, and let folks know if we're not happy with, and I'm not asking you to say it right now, but email the budget committee and say, I don't like this, or I have some other ideas, will you look at this? But I really appreciate everybody's work. Mandy, you've done a great job with all
This was a
presenting all
great
this.
presentation of a lot of detail
Yes.
of information, but it's good to also have it, not just for the board to have it, but it's on record too. We can redirect any community member to this session when it's published to get a better understanding about some of this information. I think that's really helpful.
So I just want to encourage people, if you have ideas, sometimes they can be off the wall. I won't say off the wall, but ideas, share them now so it's not get folks riled up the day of the budget or the day of the vote in the gym. I've seen that happen. When I first came here I first moved to Reedfield, I was kind of like, what the heck am I getting myself into? It was like lining us up into blocks in the gym, and people were very angry, and I was like, wow, this is not what I was told. So anyway, but I'm not saying that we can control that, but we can be helpful in that process. So if you do have issues, if you want it lower, if you're not happy, you want to know more about the cuts, I know we're trying to be careful on how we do that, but please, I really like how this process is going, so please reach out. And thank you to all of you too. I know you guys have put a lot of work into this, so appreciate your efforts. So if we have nothing else there, we can move along. I don't see any citizens, unless there's citizens online that want to talk about the budget. Or someone in the crowd wants to give us a history of the budget who's been here for 30 years or something. I won't, no, kidding. So if we're good, we will move along to number 6, which is to authorize, consideration of authorizing Steve Vose, Adult Education Director, to act as the authorized official to sign all NBRC documents.
I move to authorize Steve Vose, Adult Education Director, to act as the authorized official to sign all NBRC documents.
Second.
Have been moved and seconded, discussion. So Jay, I know we have a memo that we just
Yeah,
got.
on the other side of the memo that I put on, this is kind of the explanation that Steve had emailed to me. And basically, it's the grant that he received to put a range, and Steve, if I misspeak, please, to put a range in up at the high school for the CDL course. Had applied for a grant. We had authorized him to do that. And again, those are federal grants. So there's been a little, you might get it, you might not. Again, it's just kind of a wait and see, but they were directed, or Steve, people who were initially awarded were directed to make some changes to their applications and to continue to move forward. And we just need, it's just a formality, we need a board vote that's on record saying that Steve can sign these documents. And just so that you know, Steve has stayed in touch with both myself and Mandy through the entire grant process. So I have no qualms with letting Steve sign these documents because he's been very good about reporting what's going on. So, but Steve is here. If you have any direct questions, Steve is here and is willing to answer them as well.
Is there anything you want to add, Steve? If you want to give us an update, maybe where it's at, because I'm kind of curious.
So just an update. So we did get the grant, it was accepted. And so that was the first week of January, and so that was for $50,000 for the expansion of the truck driving range up here at the high school. Of course, then a week and a half later, there was some changes with the presidential administration, and there was some executive orders that froze federal funds, and that was part of them. So right now, it's put in limbo, but I think positive, and I think they're going to just work out some things, and then we're going to get the grant funds. There were just some components of the grant that they want to look at, and then in the meantime, they wanted us to move forward with editing certain sections, and I have 5 different sections that they wanted me to edit. These are just tiny little things, like I needed to have the board vote on the AO. I needed to add some additional information to the budget, just some additional explanations in the budget narrative. And so there were some very simple things that I'm just working through. And then I'll resubmit that. And I honestly, I don't think there's going to be any problem. I think it'll go through. It's just a little bump in the road, that's all.
Any other questions for Steve? All right, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, seeing no more questions, we'll call for a vote.
All righty, Wendy.
Yes.
My glasses on again. Kristen.
Yes.
David G.
Yes.
Annie.
Yes.
Tyler.
Yes.
Christine.
Yes.
Leslie.
Yes.
Patricia.
Yes.
Rebecca.
Yes.
Sean.
Yes.
Brian, Brian's not here. David T.
Yes.
And Tom.
Yes.
So it passes unanimously.
All righty. Well, Brian wanted me to give an update at halftime. It was Maranacook 21, Winslow 15. Very low scoring game. So we'll see what happens in the second half. So he texted me. So I know I was interested. I was gonna put it on because it's on Mike Violet, and but I figured I probably shouldn't do that. So, all right, executive session to consider labor contract proposal between RSU 38 Central Office Support Staff and the RSU 38 Board of Directors pursuant to 1 MRSA 405D.
I move to enter executive session to consider labor contract proposal between the RSU 38 Central Office Support Staff and the RSU 38 Board of Directors pursuant to 1 MRSA Section 405 subsection D.
Second.
Haven't been moved and seconded. Call for a vote.
All right, Wendy.
Yes.
Kristen.
Yes.
David G.
Yes.
Annie.
Yes.
Tyler.
Yes.
Christine.
Yes.
Leslie.
Yes.
Patricia.
Yes.
Rebecca.
Yes.
Sean.
Yes.
David T.
Yes.
And Tom.
Yes.
So we are now in executive session unanimously. We will go over to the band room. Rebecca, do you want me to try to call you for the executive session?
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay, I'll give you a call in just a minute then.
My daughter's 25 and she keeps coming home and going, Mom, what do I do with this? And she's got like her 403B information. I'm like, max it out. I said, trust me, when you're my age, you're going to be so thankful you did that.
All right, motion to adjourn. All right, thank you, everybody.